Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this month's CapsimInbox Pilot Pass Spotlight for the month of October 2021. We'll be putting an emphasis on our CapsimInbox Microeconomics microsimulation. Now, my name is Matthew Schell. I'm Capsim's Market Development Manager, where I assist our academic and corporate authors with creating these very CapsimInbox microsimulations. And I'm also joined today with my colleague and our Learning Experiences Coordinator here at Capsim, Kelsey Zimmerman. Now, I'm particularly excited to take you all through CapsimInbox Microeconomics today. And in fact, we have something new that we haven't done this year. We have our first co-authors that are going to be joining us on today's call. So I'm very excited to introduce you all to Dr. Uchechukwu Jarrett, as well as Dr. Chris Mann, both assistant professors of economics at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Now, as far as those of you that may be new to the CapsimInbox Pilot Pass initiative, this is something we've been doing for each calendar month of this year, where what we do is provide free access to one of our CapsimInbox microsimulations for you to try out yourself or to demonstrate or to pilot with students for as many students as you like for that calendar month. And it'll be as easy as just connecting with us after today's webinar. That way we can go ahead and set you up with access. You can begin trying this directly in your course to see if it's a good fit for you. Now, as far as what we'll cover over the next 35 to 45 minutes or so, well, what we'll start off with is providing you with a very top level overview of what this microeconomics microsimulation entails from the student perspective. Everything from the fictional role that they're going to take to the skills and competencies we're looking to evaluate, as well as a bit of information on the fictional company and scenario that they're going to be encountering during this 60-minute experience. From there, we're going to give you an in-depth demonstration of not just the participant view, like actually going through a quick demo of the solution via Kelsey, but also talk to you about some of the reporting metrics that we can provide as well. And then in the latter half of today's presentation, we'd like to open it up to a discussion with our authors, Uche and Chris. And what we'll do is we'll kind of do a quick recap of the simulation. We'll ask some questions as to why they felt there was a need to create such a simulation, what was their thought process in doing so. And then by the end of today's presentation, we'll have a quick Q&A session where you'll be able to ask any questions you'd like to the authors, and we can respond to them at that time. But if there's at any point during today's presentation that you do have some questions, feel free to submit them in the chat or in the questions tabs here in GoToWebinar, and we'll respond to those at that time. So without further ado, let's get started. So what exactly is CapsimInbox Microeconomics? Well, this was actually one of the very first versions we created with the help of outside authors, outside of Capsim specifically. And it was great to work with both Uche and Chris on this version, going all the way back to when we connected in March of 2019. Now, in this particular microsimulation, students are going to take the role of an engagement manager at an economic consulting firm. The company itself is called NoteNot Global Consulting, and really they specialize in business strategy development. And over the course of a 60-minute experience, you're going to be working with two primary clients, which I'll detail in just a second. Now, of course, the CapsimInbox microsimulation experience is entirely web-based, individualized, and very much self-directed, so it's as easy as submitting a hyperlink to your students to register and complete it, or we can always bulk register your students and provide login credentials directly to you. But the way that we have this simulation set up is it's broken into two sections, if you will, or with a checkpoint in the middle. That way students have some time to take a breather between different clients that they're assisting with. But overall, we expect this simulation to take roughly 60 minutes on average to complete. Now, within each of those two sections, you're going to be really helping out two main clients. In the first section, you're going to be helping out Zinda's Burger Emporium, one of NoteNot's larger existing clients. And the problem that they're facing is that there's a new sales tax on fast food that's leading to a decrease in fast food consumption. And what they're looking for NoteNot to help them with is to consult with them on determining the most optimal price for their services and set for their products and set a sales target that'll help them maximize their profits. And in this particular section, students will be interacting with roughly 12 to 15 different email or instant message stimuli. Now in the second section, students are going to be helping out Optimal Prime Analytics, a tech firm that recently patented a unique software dashboard that lets firms, compare different data and help improve their decision making. Well, Optimal has set a great price point. Sales are going moderately well, but they need to earn more profit in order to cover their development costs, as it was a pricey software to develop. So where NoteNot comes in is you're going to help them develop a better pricing strategy by interpreting sales data that they provide to you. Now, Really, at the end of the day, what are students doing is they're looking to provide strategic recommendations to these two companies. And in terms of the skills that we're evaluating, we're really looking at this more from a terminology and application approach. So they're going to encounter problems and issues related to market structures, cost and productivity, demand and supply, comparative advantage, profit and revenue, elasticity, and game theory. And really, throughout both of the sections of the experience, the students are going to be engaging with a team of different consultants and analysts to gather the proper information. That way they can determine what does that optimal pricing look like and predict the effects of what their recommendations are going to do for these two clients. So really about understanding economic efficiency and trying to deal with issues in a variety of different career fields, but also with two very different fictional clients. So now that we've taken kind of a top level view of what the CapsimInbox Microeconomics experience entails, at this point, I'd be happy to hand it off to my colleague, Kelsey Zimmerman, who will briefly describe a bit about CapsimInbox holistically. And then from there, we'll actually go directly into a short demo of the microeconomics version. Kelsey?
Great, thanks, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, quick bird's eye view. So there are three main parts of an inbox experience: the overview, the simulation, and the feedback report and skill builder. So the first thing that a participant will encounter is a brief onboarding experience, which includes a self-assessment, a brief description of the scenario, and participant role. In this case, an engagement manager at No Not Global. They'll also be prompted to complete that self-assessment, which asks the participant to assess themselves on the skills that they'll be challenged to demonstrate throughout the simulation. Next, this participant will start the actual inbox, which puts them right into the day in the life of an engagement manager's email inbox, which we'll take a peek at in a few. And then after the student completes the inbox experience, they'll be immediately provided with a feedback report, which details their overall effectiveness in handling the challenges that they're presented, as well as their skill proficiencies. Additionally, they'll be provided with a skill awareness metric that allows them to see where the discrepancies are between their perceived proficiency in the assessed skills versus how well they actually performed on those skills within the simulation. So without further ado, let's take a sneak peek into the microeconomics inbox simulation. Okay, so the first email that comes in is more informational. It's from a partner passing off this account to you and really highlighting the importance of their business, kind of putting the pressure on a little bit. Okay, you gotta deliver on this client. The storyline progresses. So the next email comes from a consulting associate asking for information on how to determine optimal price for Zinda's burgers. This is really testing for market structure skill. From here, kind of comes right back at you, asking for, they're just kind of saying, I think we should increase the price of the burger. So the participant needs to decide how to answer that based on what they know about Zinda's product and their competitors. Throughout the experience, there's also instant messages that come in asking for clarification and providing more details. In this case, it's a colleague asking for an explanation on comparative advantage. Next, this one's kind of interesting. There's another colleague that jumps in on the Zinda's situation. They kind of express some nerves asking for more explanation on the process involved in determining that optimal price and sales target. So the participant really has to have some productivity knowledge. They have to kind of know what that process looks like, start to finish. So that's just super quick overview. I hope this was helpful in giving you a sneak peek into what types of situations the participant will experience throughout the simulation. So as Matt mentioned, this is just one storyline within this inbox. There are several parallel and supporting storylines that really create that very realistic feel for the participant, and it really assesses their reactions to these situations as they progress, as they get more information, as they're confronted with different opinions from their colleagues, trying to stay the course. So yeah, from here, I'm going to pass it back over to Matt. He'll provide a little more detail on the feedback report and the information we share with the participants on their overall performance. Matt?
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Kelsey. And actually, while we have it up on screen here really quick, just to kind of highlight, the user interface approach that we took with this. For those of you that this may be the first time you're seeing CapsimInbox, we really wanted to try to make it as relatable and as high fidelity experience as possible. So not only have Uche and Chris made a variety of different characters that they'll be interacting with, but we wanted to make sure that an email interface would be a proper way of communicating these types of business issues, because it's a type of correspondence that all of us, regardless of our career field, use on a day-to-day basis. And we've gotten particularly a lot of great feedback from students on this, because the number one thing we hear is that I was able to spend more time on the substance, on how I was actively applying these different economics concepts, as opposed to wondering, how do I use this tool, basically. So a lot of good feedback there. And then again, just to kind of recap the amount of stimuli, the time frame, between the two sections combined, you're looking at roughly 20 to 25 emails that the students are going to be interacting with. And we do provide 60 minutes for each section, so more than enough time for them to not only respond to the more soft skill centric emails based on communication, but also the more quantitative style knowledge checks that the microeconomics version has as well. So with that, to Kelsey's point, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again here. Going to pull that up now. There we are. And now we can talk a little bit about the post-simulation experience. What can you expect in terms of student reports, not just on their side, but from your side as a professor or administrator? So what you're looking at here is what the student is prompted with immediately after completing the inbox assessment. They are, of course, prompted, you have completed this experience. They then exit. And then they're provided with this instantaneous and individualized feedback report. And basically what we're doing here is we're able to chart the student's performance, first off, with their overall performance by percentile against the general populace. So this would be comparing them directly to the hundreds of other students that have gone through this given version just over the last couple of months alone. And then from there, we also provide a developmental index. So this is where we're kind of speaking to, did they pick the most proficient, or with the quantitative items, the correct response? And then how consistent was that proficiency throughout the exercise? And then after that, Kelsey had mentioned a quick self-assessment during the onboarding, where we asked the student, relative to your peers, where do you place yourself in terms of your knowledge on these key concepts or skills? Well, what we do is we actually take that perceived skill data, and then we'll compare it directly to the percentile data of the inbox experience. And the first thing that we're able to provide is a self-awareness level gauge on a scale of 0 to 6, where higher scores are going to indicate that their perceived skills are much closer to reality in terms of the simulation's performance, or where lower skills can indicate that perhaps there's some underestimating or overestimating of their capabilities. So kind of a good knowledge, or good reality check there, if you will. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, is that we actually visualize the skill gaps. So we are plotting out where do they self-assess as opposed to where did the inbox assessment place them at. So that way we can not only identify where are their key strengths, but also which areas are in most need for improvement. Where do they need to develop their knowledge further? And in fact, for a lot of simulations out there, this is kind of where it would end. They get the report and then that's basically it. Well, what we did was we wanted to make sure that Inbox had a developmental approach. So they do have an option to create an individual development plan where they can rely on developmental tactics provided by Uche and Chris to serve as the foundation for expanding their own knowledge and development from that point forward. And in fact, a very common way that we assess this is via a pre-test, post-test format, where you're going to actually be able to see, was there an empirical longitudinal development in their skills from that first implementation and the second implementation, whether it be 3 weeks apart or 3 months apart, or even at the beginning and the end of the semester, for example. But what I also want to share with you on screen is what it looks like from the admin side. What does it look like for you as the professor? Again, in terms of implementation, it's as simple as sending out a unique hyperlink for a given course that you have for the microeconomics inbox, or we can bulk register accounts. But from there, you can basically sit back and watch the results come in as your students complete the self-directed experience, and you're going to be instantly provided with, first off, some class level averages. How did the overall percentile of that given class compare with the general populace? And then also, you're going to get skill score averages for each of the different skills that we're assessing within that given version. And then down below that, within the course roster, you're going to be able to see all of the individual student results, everything from their overall score to self-awareness level, how long did it take them to complete the assessment, when did they complete it, and if they did decide to take that additional step to create an IDP, you as the administrator will be able to review that and give them feedback on the process. But really try to make it just as user-friendly as and intuitive as the student experience. And in fact, there's some additional metrics that we can provide for custom reporting, but all of this information very easily exportable via the generate CSV file there. And in fact, we're also integrated with several of the main LMSs. That way, if you want single sign-on, we can help you out with that too. Excuse me. So at this time, now that we've taken a look at the CapsimInbox experience, Kelsey's given us a quick overview of what it looks like from the participant side, and we've taken a look at the admin side too. I'd be happy to introduce you to our two featured authors for the month of October. To start, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Uchechukwu Jarrett, again, the Assistant Professor of Practice and Economics at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where his particular expertise are on international economics, development economics, and energy and research courses. Now, in terms of the courses that he's currently teaching at University of Nebraska, these include the graduate level International Finance course, as well as undergraduate courses on statistics, Intro to International Economics, International Trade and International Finance, and Economics in Less Developed Countries. And Dr. Jarrett received his PhD in Economics from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, as well as his Bachelor's in Science and Mathematics and Statistics from the University of Lagos. Now, additionally, as the co-author of this simulation, I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Chris Mann, Assistant Professor of Practice and Economics, again at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where his area of expertise are econometrics, macroeconomics, and healthcare economics. And just like Uche, he teaches at both the graduate and undergraduate level, with the graduate course Advanced Macroeconomic Theory, as well as undergraduate courses for Principles of Microeconomics, Principles of Macroeconomics, Statistics, and Intermediate Macroeconomics. And he received his PhD, his master's, and his bachelor's, all from the University of Alabama on economics, with a mathematics minor for his Bachelor in the Arts there as well. So Uche, Chris, great to talk with you both today. How you both doing?
Doing well, doing quite well.
Same here. Been a good day so far.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully we could keep up that trend there. Excellent. I'm sorry, Uche, you were saying?
No, I was just gonna say it's been a while since I heard the information read back to me, and I was entranced by what you were talking. Like, that seems like a really good thing, and I for a second forgot that I was involved in its creation. So that was a really good way to put it.
Absolutely. Well, hey, I was even thinking about it back on the timeline as some of our first authors. It's almost been nearly 3 years already since we created this, and it was phenomenal to work with you both. What I figured I would do before we get into some of the questions, gentlemen, was quickly just do a quick recap of the scenario and those skills that we're going to assess again. And then I had a couple of questions I wanted to prompt you with, if that sounds good.
All right, go ahead.
Excellent. So again, just to kind of recap everything. In CapsimInbox Microeconomics, the students are going to take the role of an engagement manager at that economic consulting firm, Note Not, and really focusing on business strategy development. They're going to work with two key clients, Optimal Prime, as well as Zinda's Burger Emporium, and gather different data from them, as well as from other stakeholders within their company, to really provide key economic suggestions on everything from price to how to demonstrate their competitive advantage and enhance productivity. And really, at the end of the day, what we want to do is see that students not only can comprehend and do some knowledge checks on key economic concepts, but also test their proper application of that knowledge in the simulation as well. And again, the skills that we're looking to evaluate, or the concepts rather, market structures, cost and productivity, demand and supply, comparative advantage, profit and revenue, elasticity, and then finally game theory. So with that kind of top level recap, the first question I wanted to pose to you both, Uche and Chris, was why did you really decide to create CapsimInbox Microeconomics?
All right, Chris, you want to go first, or?
I'll go ahead and go first. So
right.
I think the factor that really influenced this was when I looked around at all of the resources that the major publishers were providing, and it was pretty much the same thing, just a bunch of randomized questions that were only kind of loosely connected. And I felt that many of those questions really didn't emphasize just how practical a lot of economic knowledge is. They were presenting scenarios related to, say, marginal benefit of Netflix and things like that that were hard to connect to the real world. And so students, I think, oftentimes walk away from a lot of those online homework platforms thinking, well, what use is economics? Where am I going to use this in the future? How could I apply this in the real world? They might have some understanding, somewhere in the back of their head that economics is important, but trying to make that connection to reality, that can be a lot more difficult. And so for years, I've been asking the publishers, well, what else do we have? Are there any type of games or simulations that we can that are out there that could help, so that students weren't really memorizing questions for an exam, but trying to understand how we could use it? And I think that CapsimInbox really fit the bill better than anything else that I saw.
Excellent.
No,
Uche, anything you'd like to add?
I'll just I'll just piggyback on what he said, and we were pretty much of the same mind. I've been asked this question on so many occasions. Okay, fine. What am I going to do with all this that you've just shown me? It's not eminently clear to people. I mean, you'll have those high-level attaining students who are able to put two and two together and start applying it, but that's not a skill readily accessible to the average student. I think what CapsimInbox Microecon does is bridges that gap. It clearly shows these students, okay, this is what you can do with it in real time. This is how you can apply these concepts. And it shows that connectivity that a lot of times students tend to compartmentalize. Oh, you're giving me a topic on elasticity, so that's the only thing I'm going to pay attention to. Everything you do is about elasticity. But here, it kind of flows through. And that's kind of what we were looking to accomplish when we started creating something like this.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for that response there. And in fact, that kind of covered a little bit of my next question, was going to be around like what was the goal or needs of the micro simulation there. So if there's anything further you'd like to add there, feel free to do so. But as an extension of that, I'd like to ask a little bit more in that, what were you doing previously prior to looking at, or prior to creating microeconomics and instituting your courses? What was the best solution at that time, basically?
So, I mean, I think that I had fallen into the same trap that many other principals of econ professors fall into, and to some degree, I still do it. But sign a book, use the online homework platform of the publisher, and assign again the same kind of boring sets of standardized random questions that don't really match reality very well. And one of the thoughts that I've had for years is that those type of questions and scenarios more encourage students just to learn enough to pass a test, but not necessarily to really retain the knowledge and to really understand economics, right? And it seems like class sizes are tending to get a little bit bigger, and we're moving more towards multiple choice type of questions and assessments. And those are very limited in not only being able to assess how well our students understand, but also limited in encouraging them to understand and learn more about economics. Because again, it really is easy just to cram for a test. And one of the things that we've tried to do with this simulation here with Capsim Micro is to create sort of an all-encompassing assessment that really pulls on topics from throughout microeconomics. And so you can see how everything ties together, so that cramming for just one section of an exam isn't really going to be enough to understand how to use economics in the real world.
Yeah, so one of the things that I did in the past was I had to rely on storytelling to sort of make that case for applicability. When I go over a particular model or I talk about a concept, I'll wind up telling students, okay, so if you were in this position, you could do this. If you were in that position, you could do it that way. This is how these things are applied. But that really doesn't drive home the point. Because first and foremost, it's probably been an hour, and I'm pretty sure they'd stopped listening to me at that point. And so going forward, it was not going to be a feasible outcome. But I feel like this immerses them in that space and actually shows them that, look, this is something that is readily transferable from what you're picking up in a principles level class, and you could potentially apply this outside. So I feel like that is one of the biggest things. In addition to that, just thinking about how this really does work in galvanizing students, I think it creates a significant amount of student buy-in because they get to see immediately that, oh, this leads to this outcome and I can use it. It's a sellable point they can put on a CV. It's something they can define as experiential learning and then take that with them into the real world and say, hey, I've actually done this. Low threshold, nobody's going to fire me or anything, but I was allowed to kind of go in and investigate and figure all this stuff out and apply. So I feel like right off the bat, you start to build in, this is what it's for, and it really does create that student buy-in that makes everything else kind of fall in line.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess to both of your points, I mean, there's obviously the experiential component that really assists with this, and then obviously the practical application of knowledge as an extension of that. Let me ask you both this. If you had to put your finger on one direct benefit from both the student and the professor perspective, what would you say that it would be?
So I can go first. I thought about that. I mentioned a little bit of it. I've found student buy-in to be one of the most important things for me going into a classroom. And I think this delivers that almost right away. It kind of shows students, because when you ask, what are you hoping to learn from this class? And they say a few things. Having something like this that can directly show them, hey, this is how you could do what it is you want to do, it makes them pay attention. I do little simulations like this, not necessarily as full-blown as Capsim, but in some of my classes where I would give students these little prompts and say, okay, how would you address this situation? And they spend a little bit of time trying to solve it. And then wherever they fall, we kind of pick up from there and we go as we go through the model. It's like, this is how you should have done this. It really does create a lot of attention being paid to some of these issues. And on the professor's perspective, I mean, it helps you reevaluate how you conduct your class, what you tell your students, what you do to kind of sell the course. Because I'm going to be honest, there is a certain degree of complacency that you get when you teach the same course over and over and over again. It's almost like a rehearsed speech. But with this, you have a different perspective. You have something else that you can tell students, okay, look, this is the aim. This is what we're going to be doing, all right? If you do one or two things, you'll be able to figure this out. So I feel like it really does give you this new perspective of dealing with your classroom and selling things a lot better to your students to kind of get them to buy in and accept what it is you're trying to show.
Very well put, Uche. Chris, any thoughts on your side?
So first, I agree with everything that Uche said there completely, especially from the instructor side as well. But I think from the student's perspective, one of the benefits that they obtain from this is because we go so in depth into the simulation, they're really going to be faced with whether or not they truly understand the material. Again, if I can always give students a practice exam to study, and they can kind of almost memorize the questions after a while, or the format of the questions they might see on an exam. But because everything's sort of tied together within this evolving scenario, students they're going to be really getting into it, and they're going to be faced with looking at problems in ways that they really haven't seen it before, right? Or trying to explain things to people that in the email correspondence that don't really understand what economics is. So we're asking very similar type of questions to what they would see on an exam, but we're trying to approach it from a very different angle. And so I think it really complements the learning experience that students are going to be gaining with this platform. And as far as from the teacher's side, I think it also gives me a little bit more confidence as an instructor, not only so that I can see with the analytics part, well, what do my students really understand versus what do they struggle with, but also confidence that I'm showing them something that can be useful as well. Because as Uche mentioned, it's very easy to get complacent, 10th or 20th time you taught the same material, and just changing a textbook, doesn't really help that much with that complacency.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I do have one final question for you both around the courses that this microsim can be used in. I think it's safe to say that microeconomics would be a good application, but I would love to get both of your opinion on other different courses, maybe ones that the audience may not be thinking of where this might have some practical applications since you're both so familiar with the content with it.
I'll start. Chris, you can follow up with some ideas. Definitely a Principles of Microeconomics course, I think, is a good place for this as a starting point. If you're teaching higher level micro courses, maybe an intermediate micro as a refresher, because in those courses you tend to build on the information, and most of that additional information that comes kind of extends from these types of analysis that you do. So it's not just about, do you remember the definitions, which we kind of test in some of those places, but do you really understand what it means so that when we apply it to a new concept, you really do understand what is happening? And I think the last place that I would recommend that is not as commonly thought is in your maybe master's level managerial economics in an MBA type of course where you could potentially use it as a refresher course, or since you're really teaching for a lot of people who are in these MBA programs, non-business undergrads, you're teaching people who have engineering degrees, advanced degrees, and things like that. You may want to use this as a gauge to see if they themselves also understand how these concepts can be applied. Because again, teaching in that space, you get to meet people who don't really have a familiarity with these really basic principles. And so they're also just seeing it for the first time, and you could potentially apply something like CapsimInbox, and it would be really helpful for them to really see this application in that space. You could get away with having undergraduates not necessarily get immersed, and they would still kind of follow you along for the most part. The MBA students who have seen a lot of real world will be much more challenging in talking about how these can be applied. So I think any course where you can actually use this as a refresher tool or as something to test knowledge would be incredibly helpful.
Just to sort of piggyback off of that, yes, I think it would be great as a refresher for really any 400 level microeconomics related course or even macroeconomics course. So things like public finance or international trade, it would be a pretty good introduction as a way for you as the instructor to just sort of see how well do they understand a lot of these concepts. What do I need to refresh, at least at a basic level? I would also say that, of course, principles of microeconomics, but I think intermediate microeconomics, it can even serve as more than just a refresher as well, because so much of the intermediate level theory is so full of math and and difference curves and fairly complicated relationships. It can be a nice refresher for students to see the same types of concepts, but from a different angle. That, yeah, okay, there is some math in the simulation. It's not calculus or anything, but at least it'll be a way of testing how well do they understand a lot of this basic microeconomic knowledge without being quite so mathematically focused with every single assessment that you might give. So
Excellent. Well, Chris, Uche, thank you for those responses and everything. I think it really paints a great picture about how this could be utilized and really what are the key benefits for both student and prof side. One thing I did want to expand upon before we get to the Q&A is I did want to just share with the audience a little bit about the developmental tactics course and really putting the emphasis on development post simulation. So really quick, I did just want to inform everybody that rather than it just being the simulation itself, rather than it just being a quick feedback report and everything, well, what Uche and Chris have done with us here at Capsim is really help flesh out setting up the foundation to improve these skills moving forward. And what we've done is we've created some supporting documents that are available through the administrative portal to you as a professor that really can help you kind of debrief this with your students to really kind of dive into these concepts a bit further and kind of make that connection between why it's relevant as a topic in terms of theory and then bringing that to the simulation in terms of practice. So what we've done is created this developmental tactics document that goes into each of the different concept areas that we've been discussing throughout today's presentation to give you that additional information on how to translate that to students. And in fact, to Uche's point earlier, with students, I mean, we get a very high level of engagement. with these types of simulations, because first, they've really never seen anything like it. Of course, they've seen email before, but in terms of a student experience, it's got just enough gamification to make it engaging, but not too much where it seems a bit silly. It does have that real world kind of corresponding component to it. So a lot of the feedback we've been getting is fantastic on this, not just from students from UNL, but from a variety of students across the country on the simulation. However, what I'm also happy to say is that we've gotten some validation on the inbox experience from some third parties as well. In fact, I'm happy to say that just over the last 18 months or so, the CapsimInbox platform, including microeconomics, has been recognized by both the EdTech Awards as well as Brandon Hall Group Awards. On the EdTech side, we've seen this selected as the 2020 Trendsetter for a product or service setting a trend for the workforce. So a great way that we've seen this applied in corporate applications and kind of that feedback loop between academia and corporate. But additionally, as the professional skills solution, and just this year as a corporate training solution. And then on the Brandon Hall Group side, we actually got to pick up 2 gold medals last December for the best advanced gaming and simulation technology. And in fact, the best advance in content authoring technology for the very CapsimInbox authoring platform that Uche and Chris utilized to create this very experience. So it's great to kind of to hear that the industry likes what we're showing here, but we hope that it's a good fit for all of your courses as well. And in fact, as a final point, before we do get into the Q&A component of today's session, I did want to show you how you can get in contact with us to be able to try this out yourself, to get some feedback from students and see if it's a good fit within your curriculum. So we're going to provide this recording along with a PDF version of the presentation deck we've been going through. And this will give you the opportunity to connect with us for a one-on-one demonstration with one of our client specialists, or also to get a free demo account access. In fact, the hyperlink right there on screen for CapsimInbox Microeconomics, you'll be able to click, create a quick student account, and then go through the exact experience start to finish as your students would see. And of course, we'll be happy to set up any pilots for you during the month of October as well. And then finally, I did, of course, include our contact information, both for myself and Kelsey, if you have any direct questions about CapsimInbox more generally, or if you'd like to reach out to the authors, Uche or Chris, to get a little bit more insight on how they created the simulation over time. All of us would be happy to answer any questions that you have. So at this point in time, we'll move to a quick Q&A session for this. I do see a couple questions already populated here that we'll go ahead and start with, but if you do have any questions out there in the audience, feel free to submit them in the chat at this time, and we'll go ahead and follow up those there now. So, Uche and Chris, first things first. I know we've talked a lot about the benefits of this, but I have a question on how do I exactly use CapsimInbox Microeconomics in my class, a little bit more practically. Anything you'd like to add?
Okay, so I think first it depends on what type of course you're looking at. Since we primarily were targeting principles of microeconomics, I think that this would be a very useful tool, say towards the end of the semester, once they already have a background in game theory and profit and revenue and all those other different concepts. This can be a way to not only sort of refresh their knowledge of a lot of this material that they've already studied, it could be used even as, let's say, a prep for a final exam that might be comprehensive. Perhaps you could even, since it does test a little bit of everything, it could theoretically even be a final exam. I haven't tested that yet, but I do think it would be great as a prep. If you're using it at, say, an intermediate level, I think that it's appropriate really at any stage, simply because students have already been exposed at least to many of those different concepts in their earlier courses. And it could be used in this case as just sort of an additional side assignment, maybe worth 5 or 10% of their grade. It could be, say, an additional, perhaps as a bonus or extra credit assignment. I think it works very well as that, since it's sort of like a more low stakes type of assignment that students can use to just sort of test their understanding. It works very well in that regard.
Yeah, I'll follow that up and say, based on things that I've been doing for a bunch of my classes, I think even giving the assessment out twice is a good idea. And not necessarily looking for a good score the first time you hand it out. So at the beginning of the class, again, and trying to kind of create that degree of student buy-in, or to give students something to focus on for the end of the semester. Say, and I do this all the time. I will give, a little quiz that I will tell them, I expect you to get a 0 because I haven't taught you anything yet. All right, that alone drives them, and they want to define me. And you'll see people celebrate like a 20 out of 100 just because it wasn't a 0, with the belief that when it comes around again, they would have accumulated enough information to be able to then get a really, really good grade, and you can show them that growth over time. So I think putting it as, a two-post system, one at the beginning, one at the end, is also a really good way of really catching their attention throughout. So any one of these suggestions, I think, would generally be a good idea.
Excellent. And in fact, we had a similar question coming in the meantime about where I put this exactly within the semester. So, Chris, to your point, more of a summative kind of, end of class evaluation, but then of course to Uche's point as well, in the pre and test, post test format, really get a gauge at what kind of knowledge are they walking in the door with to start off with, and then really being able to see how much was improved as a result of the course that you're implementing this in, basically. As another question I'm seeing come in here, a question around grading. How exactly would I grade this? So I can provide some context and like best practices that Capsim has, but anything from your perspective as the authors that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think given all the assessment features that the CapsimInbox program has, you could pretty much attack the grading any way you want. There's a raw score that basically just assigns points to every correct question. Again, even during the simulation, there are opportunities for students to get back on track, and that's kind of how we've designed it. Where if I ask you a question, you give me the right answer the first time, it might be worth 3 points. If I have to give you a second prompt to kind of give you more information to get there, it's lower. So it's really testing the idea of mastery. So you could pull that information and then use that as a grade and scale it however way you want. Or you could look to different components and say, okay, maybe I didn't really focus too much on game theory, or I didn't really focus too much here on cost and productivity, but they've learned elasticity. So I really want to focus with a higher weight on elasticity. So you can break it down that way and then pick and choose how you want to reassemble grades. So I think there are a bunch of options there that could allow you to do that. And as Chris suggested, there are other ways you can look at it as well, either as a extra credit assignment, something that you can do as part of an exam, or an alternative to students who have missed some kind of exam. So any one of those combinations would work.
I think it also depends on which type of course you're looking at and where you're placing it in the semester. If you're teaching principles of microeconomics and you want to use it a little bit earlier, maybe 2/3 of the way through the semester, then I would probably assign a lot less weight to it because you might be less likely to have covered things like game theory and so on. Or you could use it as a way of just grading the non-say game theory portions of the assignment, and then just use the information that you obtain from the game theory assessment portion, to perhaps even introduce that concept a little bit later. So I think that would be a good idea. As Uche mentioned, using it as sort of a makeup exam could also work, I think. One benefit nowadays is, since there's so much stuff is going remote, that I think that it would actually work reasonably well as some type of comprehensive assessment at the end of the semester, because the scenarios evolve a bit according to the types of responses that you're providing. Then no two students will get exactly the same unless they're responding at every single point. So I think it's a little harder to cheat for it as well.
Absolutely, and I would certainly recommend Chris and Uche's approach to the grading scale for the microeconomics simulation. However, I can share 2 more general ones that we hear at Capsim pretty frequently as well. Some of our users simply use it as a simple, experiential component in their course with no grading assigned to it, and really what they do is put more emphasis on the group discussion afterwards, where actually the professor will go through it alongside the students, and then they have a fruitful discussion about, well, why did you decide to go this particular route? What would happen if this one bit of information was posed to you? Would that change your assessment of the situation, basically? So there's definitely a way to assess there in terms of just group feedback and engagement. But additionally, too, one thing we haven't focused too much on is the developmental components with the individual development plan builder. In fact, many of the professors that we talk with will actually look at the quality and quantity of students' proactive efforts to improve their own skills, their own acknowledgement of these concepts, and really weight that into their grading as well. So not as much on the percentile-based information if they don't want to go that route, but more so on what active steps are they taking to improve their knowledge moving forward. So just a quick observation on my side there. So, and then we do have one final question I'd like to pose to you both, Chris and Uche. If you wanted everyone here today to take away one thing, whether it be about CapsimInbox generally or about the microeconomics experience specifically, what would you say that would be?
I can go first. I was thinking about this, putting myself on the other side of my camera, listening to us talk. And I was thinking it's a relatively cost-efficient way to build in experiential learning into your class that does not require too much work on your part, which is the holy grail for what professors, especially professors who teach large classes like Chris and I do. Some of these things are great, but the time to implement, how much prep you need, what you need students to understand, the difficulty in just assimilating all that information before you even get to the point where you start to assess what it is you want to assess, all of those things take a lot of time. But this, relatively easy to implement. You can do it multiple times, and you can give it to a significant number of students without actually having any issues with scalability. So I think it is very, very easy to just, and the benefits are almost the same as doing anything that would be 4 or 5 times as difficult to implement. So I think if there's one thing to take away, not just about microeconomics, the entire concept of the CapsimInbox itself, I think that's it.
So I guess going off of what Uche just said, I'll also mention that you don't really have to teach any differently than you normally teach to use this. The questions are the same types of material that you would normally cover throughout the semester. And even the questions themselves aren't that much different than the questions that you might see on, a randomly generated question on some type of online homework platform. It's just that we've assembled them in such a way that it's more of a smooth transition, so that it feels more like a natural problem that students are going to be facing. So again, it's not so different that it's completely alien. It's just we're providing a new experience to the same tried and true format, if that makes sense.
Well, to your comment on it being not too alien, Chris, to say it's a different type of vehicle, right? For us to navigate these concepts. And in fact, too, I did want to reiterate, or I did want to state one other thing based on what Uche was saying as well. In terms of cost-effective solution, one thing we haven't talked about is price just yet. The entire experience that we've just gone through today is available for just $10 USD per student. And in fact, if you want to try this out in a pre-test, post-test scenario, as we've been describing, where you get 2 uses per student and see that empirical data over time, we do that for $15 per student, basically getting the second price half off there. So any further questions we'd be happy to respond to through our email addresses at this time. But I'll go ahead and wrap up today's webinar by just saying, Uche and Chris, thank you very much for your time today by providing us the insight into the creation of CapsimInbox Microeconomics. And then also to our audience as well. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you found this beneficial, and we'd be delighted to connect with you to see if this is a right fit for your course. So thank you again for everybody, and have a great day.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.